Order, and welcome to the Scottish Affairs Committee session on sustainable employment here in Aberdeen University, and we're of course very grateful to the hospitality of Aberdeen University for once again hosting this committee in the wonderful surroundings of the Linklater rooms, I believe. And could we welcome our two guests? And I think, just for the record, if you say who you are, what organisation you represent, and anything by way of a short opening statement. And we'll start with you, Mr. MacDonald.
Good morning.
And yes, and I'm glad you got that. You pressed the button there to make sure that you're heard for the record. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm John MacDonald. I'm the interim CEO of APITO, the skills body for the oil and gas industry. Very pleased to be here with the committee this morning, and I'm looking forward to a discussion. I have a number of things that I think it would be useful for me to raise with you as well, and we'll come to those in due course, no doubt.
Grateful. Mr. Tolan, and remember your little button.
Well, thank you for the invitation to speak this morning. My name is Mike Tolan. I'm Upstream Policy Director at Oil and Gas UK, which is the trade association for the industry, representing both the oil and gas companies as well as the many supply companies that service our industry. For me, the industry is at a crossroads and has competed well in what has been a very difficult time over the last 2 years. It sees a great deal of opportunity ahead of it, but it faces many challenges to compete for those opportunities in an ever-changing energy world. Thank you.
Grateful. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that there has been particular issues in the oil and gas sector in the course of the past few years. Just for the committee, if you could help us and just to summarise just what has been the overall impact in the fall in oil prices in the course of the past few years. And we'll start with you, Mr. Tolan.
Thank you. Over the last 2 years, clearly the industry has seen some huge changes in the face of some very big changes in oil price. 2.5 years ago, we were looking at a world where $100 a barrel was as accepted norm, and we've seen oil prices fall to under a third of that. They've now moved back up over this last year, so we're sitting in the low 50s dollars a barrel, but a very big change for an industry. 2 years ago, we were struggling to make a profit, believe it or not, even at $100 a barrel in some cases. Companies have had to adapt enormously, change their cost base, become more competitive, become much more efficient. And now we're actually producing more and being much more productive in a low oil price era than we ever imagined even 2 years ago.
Okay, Mr. MacDonald.
Well, I would echo my colleagues' points there, and of course that has focused a kind of resizing and reshaping, as the committee will be well aware of the workforce. We've seen many people lose their jobs in the industry. The huge task for us moving forward is to protect the jobs that are there, and making sure that people within the industry have the right skills, the right set of flexible skills to be able to move to other opportunities as and when those arise, and then also to make sure that we've got the youth of tomorrow, really, young people coming into this industry, knowing that this industry will serve this country well for many years to come, and we need to make sure that we've got opportunities and progression pathways for young people to follow.
I mean, on that, we understand that the oil and gas sector is, of course, a significant direct employer, but it's indirect jobs. I think we've got a figure here of something like 300,000 jobs are dependent upon oil and gas activity. I mean, how has indirect employment been affected by the fall in oil prices, and is this impacted on Scotland more than the rest of the United Kingdom as a whole? And we'll come to you, Mr. MacDonald.
I think certainly, well, let's remember that the oil and gas is a UK-wide industry. And, certainly the Northeast has taken its toll. There's no doubt about that. But this has affected companies elsewhere in Scotland, in the Central Belt, in the Northeast of England, in the East of England as well. So it is something that vibrates or reverberates across the country.
I mean, is it 10% of all jobs we've got here in our notes is predicated on indirectly in oil and gas? Is that a sort of figure that you recognise as the contribution in terms of employment the oil and gas sector makes in Scotland?
It's something that I've seen used fairly regularly, but I'd really just ask my colleague to confirm that, who have the more up-to-date information on that.
Mr. Tolan?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The sector has seen an enormous change in employment over the last 2 years, obviously with a reduced spend and the pressures on the industry. And that's obviously had a very deep and personal impact on many, many people. Within the sector, about half the employment within the sector is within the Scottish economy. So clearly, given that concentration of employment in Scotland is going to be particularly felt across Scotland, both in the northeast as well as in the central belt. So your figures probably are of the right sort of order of magnitude.
And the other figures that we've got here, and you can tell me if you recognise them and if you think they're right, is that the direct employment has fallen by 7% between 2013 and 2016, and employment supported by the sector has fallen by 25% since 2013. Is that figures again?
Those feel about the right sort of magnitude, painful though that is across the sector, yes.
Grateful. Just another thing on your general employment. We understand that contract workers now make up something like 20% of all your workforce. Have contractors been more significantly affected by the fall in oil prices than some of your permanent employees?
I think that in some respects, yes, that contract workers have seen a very difficult time through this. There are many contract workers who are out there who are looking to engage with government in Scotland and south of the border in looking for new opportunities and retraining opportunities. So that's where some of this data would come from. I mean programs like PACE, which the Scottish Government do through Energy Jobs Task Force, SDS, some really good work there. But yes, contract workers feel in many cases that they don't have the protection, of course, that workers who are salaried would. They also have a number of benefits, or had a number of benefits in many cases as well. So yes, there's a feeling particularly among those, and some of the data that we see suggests that they have been particularly affected by this.
I mean, this reliance on contract workers, does that sort of suggest that the sector hasn't been investing in its core staff? And why is there so much contract workers currently employed in the oil and gas sector just now?
So I think that the sector certainly has been investing, Mr. Chairman, in its core staff and continues to do so. We would see that through the staff development work that we are aware of, and the continuous improvement work that goes on within companies. The sector has for a long time been composed of a mixture of contract workers and salaried staff, and as such that has worked well in the past for both parties, I would suggest. However, clearly at this time, that's been very difficult for contract workers. At the same time, many salaried staff have also lost their jobs or been affected by this too. And so I think there's a balance between the two here that I'm not seeing a case of salaried workers contract workers are disproportionately affected by this.
Could I come to you, Mr. Tolan, on this question too? And also, if you don't mind, if you could maybe answer this and help us, because this is on sustainable employment. I mean, is there the same sort of sustainable employment opportunities offered and provided to contract workers that you would expect from those that are directly salaried from the sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you've seen over a number of years, clearly over the early part of this decade, there's been a rapid increase in activity across the sector as we've gone into a very active period of construction offshore. And many companies in the sector have a mix of staff and of contract to allow them both to flex and to recognise the changing nature of their work even in a year, never mind across the years. And as Mr. MacDonald mentions, through the downturn we've seen both staff and contract labour take hits because of a loss of jobs, and probably in a proportionate way, because most companies are still trying to design a business where they have some flexibility around their core staff and some flexibility around contract staff to allow them to accommodate a range of conditions. the challenge for the industry, I think, is to hope to see a period of less boom and bust in the years ahead, and to build on the efficiency, the capability and the stability that are offered currently to create a sustainable business over the next decade.
Grateful. Thank you. And just in terms of the sustainable employment opportunities, I mean, could you perhaps help the committee just to, in your view, like what would be the difference in terms of opportunities available for your staff and contract and those that will be core staff?
Certainly for the companies I deal with, they recognise and they typically design their companies to have a mix of staff and contract resource, maybe because of the specialisms they need in some cases, maybe because of the flexibility they need in others. That is inherent in a lot of the business models of certain types of companies. The success for those companies is on having a strong order book both in the UK and a strong order book overseas. And the challenge for the sector at the minute, because of the fall in oil price and because of coming off a period of very strong investment, the outlook for investment is not looking that good for the industry. We've seen little new investment sanctioned, and the challenge for the industry in the next few years is to identify and start to develop new opportunities to follow on from those that we've seen in the recent past. It's the order book for companies that will, I think, give companies the confidence both to provide sustainable labour for their staff and a positive outlook for those who work on contract for them.
Grateful. Ian Murray.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just go back to the development of the industry. And I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a flavour of the trends in the industry in terms of cost per barrel of oil, in terms of production, what that's looked like over the last few years and how it compares with some of the other major competitors of oil production companies.
Thank you. We look, as an industry, we look at two main cost drivers. One is the cost of finding and developing, and one is the cost of running the business, the operating costs of running a business offshore. If I focus first on the running costs of the business, then what we were seeing is operating costs per barrel rising to just under $30 a barrel on average across the basin. Now that varies a lot by company, by age of asset, how much you're producing, and the sort of fixed costs that any field bears. Those costs have typically fallen over the last 2 years to about $15, $16 a barrel, which is a remarkable change and represents two things. One, a cutting of costs, and two, an improvement of production. And it's, if anything, like the good bit of that is the improvement in production, which has allowed us to see, I think, a much better performance in the UKCS. And in operating costs, we clearly are going to struggle ever to compete with some of the onshore parts of the world where, not least in the Middle East, where you're looking at a fraction even of the current costs. And so for a basin like this to be attractive, you need to be able to do things fast and efficiently, have the right size of volumes to develop, and to have the right stability in the tax regime, the regulatory regime, and indeed the political regime around that to make this a good basin. And we have still many things in our favour there. We are at a better place for tax, we're a better place for regulation than we were even a few years ago. And generally on the finding and developing costs, those we're looking at $20+ a barrel. They've come down, but they're going to be tested best in the market by the next wave of development, so we can do those more cheaply and more efficiently.
That's very helpful, and obviously a consequence of the collapse in the oil price has been, as the Chair has already indicated in his opening questions, the consequences for employment. What has the industry been doing to support those that have lost their jobs in the industry? Are they now completely lost to the industry, or is there an opportunity to reskill and bring them back? I think Mr MacDonald used the term progressive pathways, which I thought was very interesting. I wonder if you could just unpack what support you're giving to people who've lost their jobs and where they may be able to come back in.
Thank you. So the first thing is that we've been working closely with government, both governments in Westminster and in Holyrood, and government's agencies as well. So for people losing their jobs, what we've tried to do, and this has really been through Energy Jobs Task Force, is to see if there's room within the industry as it is at the moment for them. We've then looked at Our second level would be to look within the energy sector more broadly, and then thirdly into other parts of or other industries within the UK, across the UK. So initiatives such as the PACE initiative, where Skills Development Scotland and the Scottish Government have brought together employers who have jobs and bringing together the people who are facing unemployment or unemployed to look at where there may be opportunities there. Also important, I think, is the Transition Training Fund, which the Scottish Government set up of £10 million. And I understand from meeting SDS on Friday that we're now into the thousands where people have been, thousands of people who have been displaced have been given money to retrain. And this is, there's a clever part of the criteria here which says there has to be a job in sight. It's not just retraining to do something you like. There has to be kind of vacancies within that. In Westminster, the transition scheme run as TRS. We've been working with Oil and Gas UK and others to set up, and really that's for companies like British Aerospace, other big companies, National Rail, to advertise. They're looking for a skill set which is probably broadly similar to us. So there has been, summing up, there's been a lot of work going on in this area. And as I said, we understand through transition training, thousands of people being retrained into other areas. We want to keep those people, as interested parties in a sense when we might need their skills in the future. We continue to be in contact through those bodies that I mentioned, and as opportunities become available, the market would deal with that directly.
So the key task and function here is to try as much as possible to hold on to existing staff, retrain obviously to provide other functions and perhaps find other employment, but you want to make sure that the skills are retained for when there will be the opportunities to invest in an upturn in the price the price well too.
Yes, Chairman, and at the same time, I think that when we're bringing through the next set of the next kind of group for the workforce, the younger people, we need to make sure that those skills, and something Opito's working on, that the skill set is a varied and flexible skill set, and perhaps not so much in a kind of in the manner that we've developed skill sets in the past. So giving variety. And the last point I would add here, Chairman, as well, is that we've Opito has spoken to BEIS in London, and we are very keen to lead on a piece of work between ourselves, renewables, nuclear, and the onshore industry. And that's about standards. People can't get into industry unless they've met the standard, the competence standard. But what we are keen to see is a kind of a flexibility, and to go back to my point about that pathway, the progression, moving from oil and gas into nuclear. Right now, that's kind of a bit of a challenge. And we want to kind of simplify that for those working in the industry and for the industries themselves.
So all this has been where every cloud has, I wouldn't say silver linings, but consequences and opportunities. Is this an opportunity for the oil and gas sector to work collaboratively across a number of sectors in terms of its workforce?
Absolutely, it's an opportunity for all those sectors to work together who perhaps worked in isolation in the past, come together to make something that's actually better for the workforce, better for each of the industries, and better for the country.
Great, grateful. Deirdre Brock.
Oil and Gas UK acknowledged recently, I think, that the industry's been experiencing more turbulent industrial relations than has been the case for many years. Why is that, and what are your organisations doing to address it?
Clearly, at a time of great change in the industry, when, alas, there is change on employment, companies under some considerable duress, and there are changes in working practices, then there's bound to be some pressure on workforce and on work engagement. Companies are trying to work that through with the contractors and with their staff as well. That is an inevitable situation we're in, I think.
What actions are you aware of that the companies are taking to?
Will to try and negotiate where they can a good settlement with their staff. As a trade association, we meet regularly with the unions to discuss working conditions and actions within the industry, to try and make sure that there are many channels of communication open to employers and employees.
What's the impression you have when you hear feedback from the unions? Because I'm about to ask a question about terms and conditions for oil workers that might have apparently been affected by these changes to the industry. But Mr. MacDonald as well, if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to hear your answer too.
So as the skills body, you know, we're not directly involved in terms and conditions of workers. But what I would say to you, and you know, echo my colleagues' thoughts here, that there is much negotiation and discussion going on between companies and individuals, companies and the unions, and certainly in our own body, in OPITO, we are owned by three constituents: the operators, the drilling community, and the workforce itself, represented by the unions. So I think when we're developing initiatives and so on, we have that kind of that three-way discussion, and that to me is the key in dealing with any of these ongoing issues. There are changes to people's terms and conditions, and these are in part as a result of the market.
Could you tell us how those have changed as a result of the fall in oil prices?
So I'm not close to this. It would be wrong of me to discuss this, given that I'm representing the skills body that develops apprenticeship skills and standards for the industry. So I would be.
You feel okay, Mr. Tholen, perhaps you could.
Yeah. Like John, I'm probably unable to comment on specific employer instances. The most obvious one, though, is
but you must have heard some views over.
Indeed, the most obvious one is the change in working rotas, for instance, where there've been changes in shift patterns over the last 2 years, moving gradually back in some cases from 2 on and 3 off, or variations of that in some cases, to equal time rotas. And those have certainly been one of the visible manifestations, if you like.
Did I read somewhere it was 3 weeks on?
Sorry, 3 weeks on and 3 weeks off.
Potentially,
2 weeks on and
so
2 weeks off.
Potentially up to 12-hour days, 3 weeks on. Is that right?
In some cases, but there's also 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So effectively moving from a disbalanced rota to one where there's equal time on and off. Mm-hmm. That's the most visible manifestation, I think, of changes in some companies and working practices.
Right. And do you, as a sort of representative of the body that you are, do you think that kind of workload do you view that as acceptable? Or, I mean, what are operators saying to you about why they introduced those changes? Perhaps you can elaborate on that.
Sure, that there have been clear, at the heart of this, first of all, has to be the consideration of whatever working practices, are those safe and are those sustainable? Okay. Companies have, in some cases, moved back to these practices or sought to move back to those practices because of the costs of managing the imbalanced work rota system compared with a balanced work system. The evidence that those companies have is that they believe those can be done safely and sustainably.
Well, actually, moving on to that, the STUC has raised concerns that health and safety breaches are not being reported as they should because workers are worried about their job security in the current climate. How would you respond to that suggestion?
Well, obviously, I would urge the Chair that anyone who is under any concerns on health and safety behaviours offshore should report those both offshore, and there's the facilities offshore.
Of course, but how do they prevent possible reprisals in terms of being employed and being taken on? I
cannot condone, nor can I think any of my members would condone reprisals against anyone reporting on a safety instance. That would be appalling.
Of course. You,
it's-
there's no suggestion, from your point of view, you're not hearing of this happening anywhere in the industry?
Certainly not, and I emphasise we would in no way condone or support any behaviour like that. If individuals, or indeed members or staff of a company, have any safety concerns, safety is the first thing we think about every morning and every day for the right reasons, and no working practices should put that at risk.
Okay, thank you. And just finally, with this is obviously about sustainable employment. Can you point to any particularly good practice within the industry when it comes to sustainable employment, and how you think that might be that approach, once you've elaborated, once it might be encouraged, where it might be encouraged more widely? Yeah, probably you, I think, Mr. McDonald.
So I think that that this industry and the companies that make up this industry has worked extremely hard to protect jobs wherever they can. And that might mean with some operators and contractors moving people onto different pieces of work, giving them, for some people, extended leave even in order to retain the post and not get rid of the post. I think that there's a set of principles that contractors have signed up to, again through Energy Jobs Task Force and operators too, which is about how we will behave in ensuring sustainability and within employment. And within that, there's a draft thing at the moment, which is a scheme that's looking at lending people out from one organisation to another. Now, in the past, commercial organisations, this probably wouldn't have been something that would have been readily considered, but I think it's a sign of the times where we're seeing companies wishing to work together. So almost like a kind of a loans, like a football loan scheme, if you like. And that's in its early stages at the moment, but there's a good head of steam behind that in terms of moving that forward.
That sounds positive. Good, thank you.
Anna, who's the word's coming?
Tollen. Is it the case that this sector has in the North Sea has traditionally had some of the highest operating costs compared to other sectors in the world?
Thank you. Certainly, the UK is an expensive place to do business for the reasons you'd imagine offshore. And operating costs, particularly when you look at cost per unit barrel, are towards the top end, top quartile too often. And part of that is just simply the geography and the cost of operating offshore. What we have seen, though, is a lot of work over the years to really take cost out by being smart, by being efficient, and by being savvy. And there have been good examples of that by many of the companies in the North Sea who've taken those learnings and even apply those elsewhere around the world.
And is it fair to say that because of the drop in the price of oil, the sector has had to have a radical, I mean, you may not accept that word, it's for you to say, but a radical look at how it operates, how it works, in order to put some sort of sustainability back into it?
I'd be very happy and very comfortable with the radical. People have searched their souls how to make sure they can sustain a safe and durable business for the long term. The good news is the oil and gas are out there, and we have a great set of technologies and a great set of people to be able to develop that business. And it will only work, though, if we can be competitive at oil prices which are going to sit in the 50s, perhaps for many years to come. Our biggest competitor is probably onshore shale in the States. You know, the water's very shallow there. It's very easy for them to do their work. So we have to be able to do very smart things very cheaply and very effectively to be competitive on a global scale.
I mean, most of the talk about the North Sea as a basin is decline. But I was listening to something on the radio this morning which was talking and discussing about possible oil finds around Rockall. I mean, surely that's quite significant and suggests that as opposed to declining, there are new opportunities for oil and gas. Are we perhaps talking too much about a decline in the sector and talking ourselves down where, you know, if I was listening to the radio this morning, you would sort of think that there were other opportunities to be explored.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The industry currently produces about half of the UK's oil and gas, both. The opportunities to do so remain for years to come. The good news is no authority, no expert says that we're constrained on oil and gas opportunities, and there's a lot of oil and gas still to be found and produced in the North Sea. The challenge will be to access the right technology, to get to the right price, and obviously in new parts of the basin to know where to look. Exploration is at a low point, but there's been a lot of good work with the Oil and Gas Authority, with the help indeed of both the Scottish and the British government to really try and apply the best technology we can to pursue those opportunities, not least for new seismic. And we are indeed looking at what maybe the Rockall Basin has to offer. But in parallel to that, companies are looking to squeeze more out of existing fields. So it's not just trying to find new stuff, but to improve recovery rates from existing fields, which will, I think, provide a lot of the future business of the basin.
I know you just brought what's coming, just in my constituents' interests. I've got Merlin ERD, for example, in my constituency, who are examining, you know, using, when I'm told about this, all sorts of new smart technologies to locate and determine where the possible fields are. Is this an important feature as we go forward when it comes to discovering new opportunities in the North Sea?
You know, I think things like the Oil and Gas Technology Centre are part of the recognition that this industry will be as much technology-driven as it will be people and knowledge-driven. And is that combination of all three within a Scottish industrial context will make it a success. The company you mentioned, I'm familiar with them myself, and they are enthusiasts for their technology and their capability. And we need to let that entrepreneurial spirit continue as we have done for many decades in the industry, because there's still a very attractive business to be had, provided we can get the right costs, be competitive, and let the skilled workforce do their best in some very difficult geographies.
Grateful. Deirdre Brock.
They, in this evidence that they've just produced for the committee, suggest that if the service sector builds on global competitiveness and attracts necessary investment, there could be additional turnover of well over £200 billion over the next 20 years, possibly generated. Is that a figure that you'd recognise?
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of the figures of the OGA, and indeed they predict quite reasonably a strong future for our industry from two means. One, our industry delivers value to the Scottish economy, both obviously from the oil and gas, the taxes and the activity we pay in the first place, but then clear on top of that, the supply chain, which is both active in and around Scotland, and on the exports that it delivers as well. Exports, I believe, to more than 100 countries worldwide from Scotland. The challenge for the sector to grow is when we see energy demand growing by 30% over the next 15, 20 years, is to get a share of that action and indeed an increasing share of that action. And that's a challenge for both the British and the Scottish government to help the sector pursue externally, as well as hopefully continue to have a strong heartland here in Scotland of activity in the North Sea. Because it's those capabilities we learn here which make us uniquely attractive overseas. So strong UKCS, and indeed an effective economy abroad.
Grateful. Ian Murray.
Thank you, Chair. A much more positive future, of course, means that there's going to be new entrants into the market and jobs opportunity of the future. Can you give us a little bit of a flavour of what that looks like, and particularly with regards to apprenticeships for young people?
Yes, thank you. I think the future looks positive. There's a piece of work that we've been carrying out and will continue to carry out, which is a youth perception report, and that's looking at young people across the UK and what their thoughts are of the industry, knowing the good and the not so good times that we're going through at the moment. And that shows very clearly, that report, that young people still see this as an opportunity and a career pathway for them moving forward. So that's a great thing. We'll continue to monitor that throughout this year and beyond to make sure that continues. What we need to do is make sure that we have a range of inputs and opportunities into the system And so we're, in terms of apprenticeships are key, and different types of apprenticeship with that as well. At present, because of the safety and technical needs of our industry, an apprentice would normally take about 3 3/4 years, and that's something you would to train, and that's something you would expect given the safety aspects of that industry. Moving forward, we can see different pathways, different inputs into that, and that working with our own industry and with both governments in London and in Edinburgh. I think, if I may say, as a balance to that, Chair, the way that the apprenticeship levy has been introduced and across the UK is something that our industry is not happy with at all, and that would be around. We had an opportunity to hear principles are great opportunity here to bring 4 systems, certainly down at 1 or 2. We've ended up with 4 systems, and our industry is very clear on this. This is a new tax. Westminster have told us this before. It's a tax. We are paying. I think we are, because of the size and scale of our industry. It means that in order to be in this industry, you have to be big to start with. So, of course, you're going to be disproportionately affected by this. What it means is there's a lack of equity, a lack of efficiency, a lack of clarity, and despite the good work that Scottish Government has done in many, many areas here, to tell us simply that this has been imposed by Westminster, it's not something we wanted, and that the money is not new money, and out of 220 million, 10 million will go into a flexible fund, is simply not acceptable.
What do you need back from it? Because obviously the government have committed to the proportions coming plus a little bit extra to make up the shortfall. What does the oil and gas sector need from that?
So what we need, again, if we talk about equity, in England, we'll be able to claim up to £27,000 per apprentice across the lifetime of an apprenticeship. In Scotland, it's 9,000. And the cost is about 90,000. So our industry already pays 90% of the cost of an apprenticeship. And then now we have the tax on top of that. And my fear here is that what will happen here, the unintended consequence of this tax will actually mean that there is fewer training opportunities taking place, apprenticeship opportunities. Where do companies find that tax from, if not their training budgets? And that's where, so in England, we can claim back up to 27,000. In Scotland, it's business as usual and 9,000. We would want...
Why is that? I don't know why is that? It doesn't seem very fair at all. So why? Why is it like that?
I think
What's the reason?
I can only say what we've been told by the Minister and officials in Scotland, and that is that this is not new money, despite Westminster telling us it is new money, and that it will be business as usual. So those are the... It's very, very disappointing to us.
And when you communicate this to government, both Westminster and Scottish, what responses are you getting back?
So I think we're getting responses back that that suggest a lack of join-up between those who are making decisions in Westminster and those who are discussing this or are responsible for this, Chair, in Edinburgh. The responses are simply, from Edinburgh, we didn't want it, we didn't ask for it, and it's not new money. Yep. And that's difficult for us to deal with. Yeah. In Westminster, we're being told it is new money, and
we know all the tensions between UK and Scottish governments when it comes to this particular issue. I just wondered your view and whether you've been listened to when it comes to the various appeals that you've made both to UK and Scottish government.
Yeah. So, Chair, our view would be that that there needs to be a rethink on this in the Scottish government. A 10 million fund from 220 million next year isn't sufficient, and that 10 million is tied to college delivery, and while we fully support the college sector in Scotland, this needs to be employer-led and employer-delivered.
We'll maybe leave that there. Ian Murray, have you concluded? Or you?
To go back to how your skills development portfolio, if you like, has changed on the back of the reducing oil price. And I do want to pick up again what you've just said, because if you're saying that the transition money of 10 million that's coming from the new apprenticeship levy is to be college-based, what is your actual ask? What do you need back?
Okay.
And what do you, not even comparing it to what the 27,000 from the UK government, what do you need back as a sector to build those jobs of the future?
So I think, just so that I can be clear, I don't think I'm suggesting that the 10 million is, that there's a separate 10 million fund. It's not part of transition training fund. That's something else. We would like to see clarity on where that money is coming from. Is it from the 220? I think, how have things changed for us? We talked about that multi-skilling, that reskilling approach that we've been carrying out in the industry. I think there's a big focus from us on STEM, on science, technology, engineering and maths, on young women as well into the industry. That's a kind of a long-standing issue for us. And getting really into STEM, into primary schools. Now, it may be that what we're doing are projects that have an oil and gas flavour to them, but it may be that these young people decide to go into another branch of engineering or technology. That's great. It's good for the country. Good. However, we're focusing hard on that. We're looking at the moment on new styles of apprenticeship that may include the foundation apprenticeship, the graduate apprenticeship. What is our ask? Our ask is, I think, two key things for me here. One is it's very difficult for a graduate, and these are young people who entered university at a time when things were much better in this industry. Very difficult for them to get the experience they need to get into a proper job, a real job, if you like. So we would ask for, we'd like to see a fund set up that would provide opportunities to become an intern for a fixed period with a company and get that experience. And we'd like government's help with that. And that's perhaps an ask from the 220 million that's coming from Westminster. Secondly, we would ask from that money is that we look at fully funded apprenticeships. This industry is in a very difficult situation. It's served this country well for many, many years. And now we would ask government's help in saying, well, could we fund a certain number of apprenticeships going through over the next number of years to make sure when that upturn comes, then we're ready for that. Because right now, companies out there are finding it very difficult to fund this and finding it even more difficult with a tax where there is no return.
Okay, thank you. Chris Law.
Thank you, Chair. You've answered some of the questions I was going to ask about the levy and also went into some detail about what your key asks were. It's actually made me think a little bit more about what's happening in Norway with their oil investment fund. I know that Chancellor Healy and also former Chancellor Darling has said it had been a grave mistake. There was a lack of tax receipts kept towards a fund. Going forward, however, would you like to see something like that be created either at UK or Scottish level or both?
I think from a skills perspective, in fact, the fund that we see in Norway and other countries, from a skills perspective, actually the levy may well have done this in a different form. So for me, for skills, what I want to see is opportunity for our young people right across the UK and a sustainable industry. Now, I think that can come through market, through a kind of open market, competitive market policy. However, in difficult times like this, is going to either need government support or a support through such a fund. In terms of skills, again, I do believe that could have, here's the ideal opportunity. If there's £220 million coming in, why don't we use that to to get us through this difficult time on skills.
Absolutely. Mike, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the years, the country has benefited of the order of somewhere like 350 billion pounds of taxation in today's money from the industry. Looking ahead, I think because of the changing nature of the cost of the basin, the changing nature of the production from the basin, we don't see the same depth of yield of taxes in the years ahead, simply because of the pressures the industry is under. And it's probably ill-befitting for a trade association to recommend how the country spends those monies. I think that's much more of a political decision than one for the trade association.
I guess you're going to say something along those lines, but just more of a recommendation or rather than an instruction. Would it be something that perhaps industry would like to see?
I'm going to step back from recommending how the government spends the taxes. We're after a stable tax regime and one which hopefully demonstrates that we're profitable and delivering funds to the country.
Okay, thank you. Just sticking on the tax regime and receipts at the moment, obviously you're quite correct, between 300 and 350 billion has been paid in taxes, and obviously at the moment we're in a position where revenue's falling. Can you tell me if the current tax regime support is helping in recovery for the sector, or what more can be done?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The tax regime has varied a lot over the years in the UKCS, and of recent years in particular, it's gone through some very big changes, and I hope ones which are making the industry more competitive. The challenge for us is to make sure that we see fiscal stability over the long term so that we make the most of a competitive tax regime, which we now have, and one where we have a competitive cost base. And if that combination of the two together is probably the best thing we can do to allow the industry, frankly, to get out and do its stuff, which is to invest in the future opportunities in the basin. So stability and preferably a very boring tax regime is what we'd be after. Thank you.
Okay, and just a last question. When do you see oil and gas industry making a positive contribution to public finances in the future?
Well, I hope it's doing so even now, not least through the employment taxes and the broader contributions and corporation tax to the sector. Even now this year, I think we're just about holding our heads above water. This fiscal year, just about balancing tax receipts, but over the next 5 years, the industry is looking to deliver, I think, something like £7 or £8 billion in taxes over the 5-year period based on the last budget book. We will see the new one not very long away, and I think that will factor in the benefits both of the cost changes we've seen, the improved competitiveness of the industry, and maybe a better outlook for production. So I hope to see that we are contributing our share to the economy as we work hard to deliver a good future.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Supplementary from Ian Murray.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the £78 billion in the Red Book, Treasury Red Book, in terms of the next 5 years. Can you give us some context what that looks like in comparison to, say, the 5 or 10 years before, to give us a flavour of how much the industry has really struggled with this oil price downturn?
Thank you. There's probably two ways of trying to assess that. One of them is, so the ONS, Office of National Statistics, publishes rates of return for the sector, which show how much cash the sector's generating. And over the last 5 years, that's fallen from 20 or 30% down to barely 1 or 2% most recently. So the industry is struggling to make a margin on its money, and it needs to be able to do that to reinvest, to get the next barrel out of the ground. It is, alas, a very simple industry we are. The fiscal yield has fallen from, in 2011, it was about £12 billion, and it's fallen almost to zero and then is just coming back up above now. But that represents two factors. First of all, a big change in oil price, but also we're taxed on a cash flow basis. So it recognises how much money you're spending as well as how much profits you're making, so that it helps to attract investment early and is taxed on that basis. So you get heavier taxes, better benefit later as investment slows. So quite a change, but one which reflects, I think, the torment of the sector.
I mean, it's a change, but it's absolutely dramatic. I've just seen figures here. In 2010-11, like tax receipts from oil and gas accounted for around 5% of total government tax receipts. And in 2015-2016, it's predicted that for the first time it'll be negative in terms of tax receipts. I mean, that's huge in terms of a downfall in what the government would expect to secure from a sector as so important as oil and gas. I'm just looking at how you are taxed, and maybe you could help us here just to try and understand about how all this works out and how we could come to figures like that. You've got the ring fence corporation tax, you've got the supplementary charge, and then there's the petroleum revenue tax. I mean, how does all this impact, and how do we start to understand figures like that from 5% of total government receipts to being negative in this current year?
There are two main themes to the taxation. One is we typically have what are known technically as cash flow taxes, so they represent both the profits and the spend of money. And so you benefit by allowing to depreciate your capital early, which helps to drive investment. But the Exchequer then benefits from the profits as they come once you make that investment. Tax rates, even 5 years ago, were sitting between 60 and 81% in the pound. They went up in 2011 to that rate. And the challenge in the industry at the time was that those taxes represented a high point on the low competitive edge, if you like, for taxation. Taxes were going up to the point when we were becoming more competitive. So it hit us, if you like, in the midriff when we really didn't want it. That started to drive investment out of the basin, some which has returned since over the last few years. But it shows the pressures that have been on the industry over the last few years when, I say, with the cash flow tax, much of the profits, if you like, is going straight to the Exchequer. And the low point last year represented the fact that the industry was spending more than it was earning, which is clearly not a healthy point to be at. And that dynamic, gradually the industry is spending less and earning more, so we're coming head above water. And the recent wave of investment is depreciating through the tax regime. So those two things together mean that hopefully we will be a positive taxpayer this coming year. And indeed for years to come, with that combination of new production and investment.
So you reckon last year was just a one-off when it was negative in terms of tax receipts?
It represented a year when we saw the torment of low oil prices, big changes in cost, and still the impact of a wave of investment. The industry has invested something like £60 billion on new production over the last 5 years. And those things gradually get eaten off the tax bill as you see that represented in the way the taxes have gone. In the coming years, we'd like to think that we are again a net taxpayer, but that depends on many things: costs, oil price, and indeed activity.
Grateful. Anna Soubry.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry. Mr. Michel. I think it was in 2012, wasn't it, when Sir Ian Wood did his review, and all the recommendations were accepted by the government in about 2014, when of course the price of oil was very different to what it is now. And I just wondered whether or not, taking into account things like the new college, or what's it in Aberdeen that has been introduced, I think as part of the city deal. I just wondered whether or not, given the fall in oil prices, the expectations about the volume of petroleum which can be recovered should be looked at again, given the fact that there's been the fluctuation and indeed the fall in oil prices. I don't mind who answers it.
I wouldn't want to stop Mr. MacDonald also having a say in this one. So I had the pleasure of working with Sir Ian Wood on the Wood Review, and I think it caught an opportunity to reflect where we were on the maturity of the basin and try and shape the industry for the years ahead in terms of its thinking, its maturity, and to really allow the industry to build on its past but have a much more independent future, maybe a little step back from government with a more focused set of regulation to really try and drive the future of the industry. And coupled with that, the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, which is now part of the firmament as well, I think recognises that we will be driven by technology, we're good at technology, and that's an essential part of our future. The combination of maybe improving the infrastructure in and around Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland as well is a vital part of delivering to really make sure that the capability of the sector here in Aberdeen is not held back by its distance from other markets. In terms of the prospectivity and the outlook for the basin, at the minute, companies' plans are to produce something like 6 or 7 billion barrels. None of those are in the bank, but they're the things that companies are currently connected to trying to produce in the North Sea. And every single billion barrel, they're going to be above that, needs new investment, new focus, and in many cases has still to be found. So the shape of the industry to come will be determined by what we do over the next few years. If we can get activity to be at the right place and we can sustain a competitive supply chain, we will be in a good position. But we need all of those elements, technology, supply chain, exploration, and cost to be right if we're going to see a positive future for the industry.
Okay. Just on decommissioning, I mean, there's lots of talks and suggestions that this will open up a number of opportunities for those that are currently working in the oil and gas sector. Could you talk or just help the committee understand better what these opportunities are and what difference that will make to the skill set that currently operates within the oil and gas sector, and what's required in order to move forward to decommissioning? And I think just for myself and Mr Law, as part of our cities deal too, decommissioning is going to be featured as quite a large part. And maybe just help the committee a bit more understand what's required in order to meet this transition.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in terms of decommissioning then, there are huge opportunities here for us across the UK and particularly in Scotland. So it's important that we don't, or that we make sure that we're ready for those. From a skills perspective, the skills that put together a rig are the same skills really that take a rig apart. Now, there's also a whole series of scrapping the rig and so on, and making sure that that's done in an effective and as green a way as possible. But for me, while there will be jobs here in decommissioning, what's a good thing for us is that the skill set is similar, and that means that we can upskill, reskill people quite readily from those who are working on maintenance on rigs, on construction, to the deconstruction and the decommissioning of those rigs. So we're looking to develop something this year which would look at a small piece of work, and we want to talk to Skills Development Scotland about this, as a piece of that transition training, where we take people who have perhaps lost their job or are in danger of losing their jobs, and then move them over to that decommissioning sector. That will grow, as we all know, as time goes on here. But the important thing here is to be ready for that. But I would say to the committee that it's not the wholesale new set of skills that sometimes we read about, but that's a good thing.
Yeah. And do you feel that, do you feel first, both Scottish Government and UK Government understand the significance of the opportunities presented by decommissioning, and are you getting the necessary support from both governments in order to try and progress this?
Yes, in different ways. But the Scottish Government very firm and helpful in this, and certainly looking, at different ports and speaking to us about how can we help you develop something quickly here that industry needs, wants, and will do the job.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was a minister, we specifically had a working group that looked at, amongst other things, Mr Wishart, decommissioning, because it's so important. There's two, am I right in remembering two aspects to it? Yes, there's the dismantling of rigs and the actual decommissioning, which of course we can become a world leader on, because we're not the only part of the world where that will happen. But also, isn't there end of life? I think that's the unfortunate term, where there's still, but there's still oil there to be extracted if you've got the right skill set, the right equipment.
Absolutely, and I'm going to just going to say one more thing, if I may, Chair, and then my colleague here probably has something more to add. But really, in terms of across the UK, the northeast of England, again, BEIS have been working with constituents there to ensure that there's, in the northeast of England, that there's an offering there. But Scotland, for me to finish off, Scotland is very well placed to take advantage of this. We've got the right skill set, and we've got the right resources to deliver on it.
Grateful. Mr. Tolan.
So thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chair. The decommissioning opportunity is something, thank you. The decommissioning opportunity is something which will last maybe 30 years. It's not mostly a one-night wonder. It's going to be something for a generation to come. And will typically, in today's money, be a spend of about £1.5 to £2 billion a year. To put that in context, we spend currently about £7 billion to operate the North Sea, and even this year we're still, on legacy investments, seeing something like £8 billion being invested in the North Sea, based mostly on already sanctioned investments. So it's an important part of a much bigger pie. The opportunities over the next generation to come will be as much around being really smart at how we do decommission offshore and those technologies as it will be the activity onshore. And the onshore dismantling, much as there's a very visible part of it, is still a smaller part of a much bigger pie, and needs to be looked at in that context to make sure that companies and individuals recognise there's value and opportunities here, and then there's exportable knowledge and exportable capability, much of which, alas, is over the horizon in terms of being done offshore.
I'm grateful. Yes.
Can I just ask a supplementary sort of to that? Another point which was always made when I was in the department was that there had been historically, to be blunt, a lack of cooperation between the different companies. And I heard lots of stories, Mr. Wishart, about different bits of equipment for one company that wasn't the same as another company, which was then a nightmare, obviously, for supply chains and efficiency. Have you seen in recent times a huge or an improvement in that? So as a sector, you are much more efficient. It's never pleasant to be pointed about your failings, but I think most failings are true. That the classic would be that component A doesn't fit in component B's opportunities, valves, a whole range of things where I know myself as an engineer, the novelty is amazing, but frankly, you'd rather avoid it. Part of it's the way the industry's grown up, but the challenge for the next years will be to be smart and efficient. We've been leading a lot of work within the industry to really focus on efficiency and to share best practice. And companies are trying to deliver almost an Amazon of the future type approach where you can just get that component off a single warehouse to service anywhere. It takes time to do, but companies recognize the one-size-fits-all almost approach is needed to pull the cost out, to be efficient, to be smart, and to compete against onshore American shale oil, putting it bluntly.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to swap my questions about.
No,
I
you
hope
go
you
for
don't
it.
mind, Chair. But and we've done really well so far in not mentioning the B word. But I'm afraid it's now time. In 2015, all UK gas exports and 75% of oil exports were going to the EU. Now, on the 10th of February this year, it was reported by the Times that a leaked government document had ranked industries by priority for the Brexit negotiations, and that the oil and gas industry had actually been ranked as low priority. How significant do you think the UK's departure from the EU is likely to be for the oil and gas sector?
I'll go first on this one, if I may. I think we would need to, we'd want to say first of all that our industry works in many countries across the globe and works well within those regimes. I think that the Brexit decision by the British people is one which we will continue to work within. This is government policy. We need to make sure that when we have workforce coming into this country from perhaps from other countries with a set of skills that we don't have here, that there is a fast and efficient, clear process in order to bring people from other countries in. So that would be, it would be about, you know, sometimes we need a set of skills quickly. They may not be available locally. We may have to bring them in from elsewhere. We would ask, our ask of both governments in this would to be ensure that there's a process in place that allows us to do that.
Perhaps to build on that slightly, in one sense, you have some of the things to do with Brexit are common across the industry, and some things hit different parts of the industry in different ways. As Mr. McDonald mentioned, in terms of access to labour, we work in an industry where we need access to the best skills from around the world to serve around the world. So the free movement of labour, when done efficiently and effectively, is a vital part of our success. And you'll see that in the northeast of Scotland and right around the world. Access to markets is important, whether you're within the supply chain or indeed whether you're an oil and gas company itself. How that then rolls out in part depends on the activities of that company. So oil and gas companies per se are probably as much more focused on the impact of sitting within currently a common energy market and the ability to buy and sell energy across Europe, and we have to see how that emerges. But it's vital to recognise that we will de facto still be part of a common energy market with or without the changes that are going ahead. As you look further afield, companies right across the supply chain import and export across Europe, and again we will have to see how that emerges and hope that we have the minimum barriers to trade whatever happens in the future.
So would you say that there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment around the negotiations? You don't know what's going to happen, and it is important, would you say it's important that you do have access to these skilled workers from the EU, and also, as you said, access to market without trade barriers and tariffs? I think you mentioned that there's a need to keep commercial codes and tariffs consistent in the future. So are all these things, is there anything else that worries you? Do you see companies still wanting to invest? Or is there a pullback on investment because of this uncertainty at the moment?
Clearly, no industry likes uncertainty, and that tune is as much one for any industry, not just our own. As Mr. McDonald mentioned, we are active, and indeed Scottish supply chains are active in 100 countries and more around the world based on what we do here. Only a few of those are clearly within Europe. And so the destinations for our goods and services will still be there. The challenge is to make sure that we can access those markets in Europe as efficiently and as cheaply as possible. And again, like others, we have to see how the negotiations emerge.
Sorry, Margaret, just to follow this up. You may not want to prioritise, and we wouldn't criticise you for that. But what's more important? What are you more worried about? Is it the lack of access to this free movement of labour, or is it the uncertainty and perhaps the lack of access or the diminution in the access to the market?
It's hard to prioritise one against the other because they do different things. But access to skilled labour, some of which comes from within Europe, some of which is from outside Europe, is part of how we succeed as companies. Almost every company in the oil and gas industry has an international footprint and has to find a way to be efficient and effective doing that. So clearly, movement of labour is part of what we do. In terms of access to markets, I think, well, we ourselves are commissioning work at the minute with a number of consultancies looking at the micro detail, and certainly we'll be very pleased to share that outcome with the committee once we have it. But access to markets is important, both for goods and services, as indeed for the end product, some of which around energy policy we will see emerge in due course.
We'd be very grateful for that, because we're also doing an inquiry into Scotland's relationship with Europe and exploring some of these issues. So if you could, that would be very helpful. Margaret Ferrier.
Thanks, Chair. Just another couple of questions. Do you feel that the industry, the regulator, the UK government, the Scottish government are all on the same page when it comes to kind of supporting the oil and gas sector and maximising, you know, the economic recovery of oil and gas?
So if I could answer first on that one. Mostly yes, I think would be a kind of qualified yes on that. And that's not because anyone is not getting involved, it's just the complexity around negotiations. It's the complexity of our industry, which often I describe as a series of industries within an industry. But certainly, you know, from a skills perspective, there is a clear direction from both UK and Scottish governments, and we need to do what's best here around maximising economic recovery. How can we get the right skill set in order to assist with that? So particularly, you know, I'd mentioned Skills Development Scotland, OGA, certainly pushing forward with that as well. And again, Energy Jobs Task Force in Scotland and BASE in Westminster, working very closely with APITO on those things.
I think, thank you, to build on Mr MacDonald's comments, the industry, the regulator, BASE and Scottish Government are, I think, very strongly aligned on trying to make our industry a success, as indeed I'd like to see strong industrial success of the countries as a whole. The sector has got some pretty difficult challenges to face, though, because for a good future, we need to continue to invest, and we need to continue to develop new opportunities. And that hunger for new developments and the need to attract new capital to the basin is probably the most immediate challenge the industry faces. There is no easy solution, but being cost competitive, being comfortable in the regulation of the industry, and recognising that this is a good place to invest means everyone needs to align together and to deliver that outcome. But I see no lack of resolve to do so.
So you would say that there is still gain there for investment. Can you maybe tell us how many barrels of oil you think is still out there in the northeast? Have you worked it out? So I'm going to slightly duck the $64,000, actually more than $64,000, I'm pleased to say, prize. But at the minute, I mentioned about 6 to 7 billion barrels are connected around the UK to oil fields, gas fields for production. The challenge is every single, I can say, billion barrel, that almost makes it sound easy. Every barrel needs new money to attract, to develop new stuff. And that is down then to the business of the industry being cost competitive. The industry seemed to be a good destination for investment, and the governments to work closely with industry to make sure we can win them here in the UK. I think back in November 2016, Oil and Gas UK had called for a recommitment to the industry from the UK government. What made that call so necessary, and has there been a positive response from the UK government?
So we've seen a strong and, I hope, renewed focus from the government for long-term tax stability, which is important because that sets the context for people to invest now and deliver future opportunity. In parallel to that, one of the things that we are keen on, which is sort of coming out of the Brexit discussion, is this discussion around industrial strategy. To recognise that we have a tremendous supply chain, a tremendous industrial sector, and one of the challenges that we believe the British government, and I hope the Scottish government will take up, is how we recognise the capabilities of the sector so we can stand alongside aerospace, automotive, as being part of the USP of the economy within Britain. You know, some tremendous companies in Scotland, tremendous technology in Scotland, and it works offshore and it works overseas to good effect. And so to have us stand along, success for me is to have us stand alongside aerospace and automotive as being an industry not just of today, but an industry that's capable for tomorrow. Oil and gas will be needed for decades to come. For a lot of what we do, there is no better solution still for the world economy.
I know we're close to winding up, but I've got two further questions. One first from Ian Murray and then to round things off from Deirdre Brock. Ian.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've obviously talked about prices and jobs, investment, decommissioning, a whole plethora of complicated topics directly related to the oil and gas industry. The Scottish Parliament used to produce an oil and gas bulletin that looked at many of these issues. Is that something that's still happening and useful, and does it allow us to examine what's going on, where the opportunities are, and what we need to do as policymakers to exploit them?
I haven't seen that in some time now. I'm not sure if that's just a case of I've not seen it and it's still there, and people in my organisation and others. I'm not sure if Oil and Gas UK are aware of it. But yes, it was something in the past that was useful. I would have to check, and happy to respond to the committee after this meeting. Yeah.
Mr. Tolan, have you seen it?
I'm slightly embarrassed to say I haven't seen one recently, but sometimes you do let these things slip. I would say the Scottish Parliament does publish, or the Scottish Government do publish a lot about the industry, and there seems to be a growing expertise within Scotland and within Scottish Parliament of its true capabilities, which is attractive, clearly.
Okay, thank you. Deirdre Brock.
Thanks, Chair. It's really probably more for Mr. Tolan. I'm just wondering about, there's been big drops in the price of oil in the past, obviously. I found something online which, adjusted for inflation, suggests, say, that in 2002 it was down to $34 a barrel, 2008, $51 a barrel. I'm just wondering why the industry did not look then, as seriously as it is obviously now, at operating costs, reducing those, getting those down. And do you think if they had, that might have been possible there to avoid now some of the job losses that have been taking place in recent years?
Thank you. The wisdom of age is something which I think all industries would like to have in what they do. I was working through the sector both through that downfall and downturn in price, as well as in previous ones as well. And I think the differences come probably twofold. One, we were at a different place then to now. So in 2002, we were producing 2.5 times per day in way of oil and gas than we do now. So whilst costs were high, we were producing a lot, so it felt a less difficult place. And so the need to change now, when you get to mature years in some cases, really brings home to you quite where you're at and forces people to look much more challengingly at where we are. So I think that hindsight has made a different approach this time. And coupled with that, working with the Oil and Gas Authority and with, I think, a more robust and challenging interface with the government who has high expectations, quite rightly, of what the industry can do, has made us think much more carefully about how we plan a long-term future. I wouldn't want to say we were ever casual in the past about that, but thinking hard about the future now is much more vital when you can see that if you don't, things will slip away from you, and no one wants that.
So then you feel that this will be subject to a constant review going into the future than was the case in the past?
Indeed so. It's probably worth reflecting. I remember sitting with some of our members who are our managing board in 2014, well before the oil price started to wobble. And there was a challenge then to become more efficient and to focus on the future, because companies knew that where they were at wasn't as healthy as they should be. And so I think we are much more working with our eyes wide open of the opportunities and the challenges now. And with that wisdom and that insight, I think you can plan a better future than just ploughing on as maybe we've done in years gone past.
We're going to have to leave it there, and we're very grateful for both you gentlemen coming along and helping us. We're considering doing a full inquiry into the oil and gas sector from this committee, and I'm pretty certain if we decide to do that, we'll be asking you back again to help us with that one. But for just now, thank you ever so much for attending this session this morning. Order.